As you said, there was an independent arbiter, the former federal judge Sue Robinson. She said that Deshaun Watson did indeed violate the personal conduct policy in her estimation, but she felt that she was bound by precedent that had been set by the league, wherein the league treats what it defines as sexual assault with violence differently than what it defines as sexual assault without violence. And so because she felt hamstrung by the precedent of punishment that the league had previously doled out, she returned this 6-game suspension. As you had said, the league desired a full year. So then the league has the ability to appeal Sue Robinson's decision to the commissioner or to a designee of the commissioner. The commissioner had chosen a lawyer that has worked with the NFL previously as his designee. He was reviewing all the evidence that Sue Robinson had already reviewed, but at the same time, Deshaun Watson's camp and the NFLPA were in communication with the NFL to get to some sort of settlement, some agreement, so that there was no nuclear option. Because of course, Peter Harvey, the designee, could have handed down something else. And then in theory, the NFLPA could have gone and sued in federal court and asked for an injunction. And anyway, it could have gotten even messier.
Yeah, you know a lot about this stuff, a lot more than I do.
Well, in any case, so I'm asking for this interview with my CBS hat on. I'm not getting it. But now there's this other hat that I'm wearing during the preseason, and that's as the sideline reporter. And the way that games work in the preseason is that both teams have their own broadcast teams.
Right.
So if the Jaguars are playing the Browns, the Jaguars have a broadcast team with their own play-by-play and color people and their own sideline person, and the Browns have that team. And that's because these games are aired in local markets, and the local markets are interested in their team, especially in the preseason when you're learning guys, you're getting to know guys, you want to know who's making the roster, and a lot of these are unfamiliar faces. So arbitrarily speaking, if you're living in the city of Pittsburgh, you don't necessarily care who's making the 52nd and 53rd spot on the Seahawks roster. You just want to know about your team.
Sure.
So the preseason operates in this way, where you have these centric teams or centric broadcasts, team-centric broadcasts. And then the role of the sideline reporter is actually more interesting, more pronounced than during the season. And that's because these guys do interviews during the game. I mean, for the
well, and you don't have to cover both sides. You're only covering the Browns.
Rookie MJ Emerson has a pick 6 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. When he's out of the game, he comes over to the side and he talks to me. We do an interview. Right. It's lighter, it's fun, it's whatever. So I'm not getting this Deshaun Watson interview. But I say to the Browns, well, how are we handling the sideline? Because if somebody plays well or somebody significant plays in a preseason game, they're supposed to come talk to me. Deshaun Watson hasn't played a snap of competitive football in 19 months. Wow. He's about to go take the field. He is the most polarizing figure in the NFL, not only for all of these issues of his conduct, not only for all of these allegations of his behavior, his sexual behavior, but also for his guaranteed contract, which at $230 million may not be a big deal in Major League Baseball, but surely is a big deal in the NFL.
It's unprecedented.
Exactly. So I say to the Browns, well, how are we handling this? And the Browns say back to me, well, I guess when he comes off the field after however many series he plays, you can interview him. But it should be just football. And I say, no way. No way. Now, this is what's so hard, Seth. There's also a time and a place for things, right? So in the middle of a preseason football game, standing on a sideline while football is being played and all of these athletes, 100 athletes trying to make a team are lined up behind you is not necessarily the place to ask the tough probing questions that you want to ask. Like, how could you not understand that this was unwanted sexual contact, or that the judge claims that this is how do you respond to that? That's not necessarily the place for that. But I am unwilling to just say, okay, let's ask.
But you can't ignore it. Right. I see what you're saying. You're saying I won't cross the line, but I have to walk the line or else I lose all my credibility.
Exactly. And so what was ultimately brokered is you could have exactly 3 questions with him as he's getting on the bus. Now, it wasn't directly as he was getting on the bus. It was actually in the corner of a ballroom, because had it been outside as he was getting on the bus, there may have been a ton of hubbub and
fans and
photographers, things like that.
Right.
But anyway, it was essentially, I was getting on the bus. I was only given 3 questions. There were parameters to the questions. The first question had to be about football. I negotiated, well, the second question is going to be whatever the heck I want to ask, and then Seth becomes this problem of, you only get 3. You don't get an appropriate follow-up.
Right.
So what is the one that I want to latch onto? And it's also, it could blow up at any point, right?
Sure.
Like, I'm doing this for a team-centric broadcast.
Yep.
He doesn't have to do it. He could walk away.
Sure.
Which, if he walks away, fine. What can you do? All I can control is the questions that I ask.
Was it live? Was it live, or was it pre-recorded and then aired?
It was recorded and it aired in the pregame show.
Yeah.
So we recorded it as he was getting on the bus at about like 3:30.
I wondered about that, like how dangerous it would have been if, again, you're not going to ask that probing question, but you are going to address something. If he storms out, you don't want to be live. Just like I'm worried about you storming out of this podcast.
No, I wouldn't do that. I try to do that at least politely.
Right. I understand.
No, but in any case, so the question I came upon was to ask about his remorse, because that has been kind of the narrative as I phrased it to him. Sue Robinson said that informed her decision-making, that he has not shown any remorse for his behavior at all, even if it is the simple fact of saying, my intent was to never harm, but now, after months of therapy, or after, looking at it in a different perspective, I realize whatever it is, I mean, I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I wanted to come to this idea of, like, is there any remorse here? Like, is there anything at all that you regret? And so for the first time, he did actually say that he was sorry for the impact that he had on these women. So he's obviously still engaging in a piece of civil litigation. I think that he's very conscious of what he can or cannot say, according to his lawyers. The trouble for me, Seth, was that I did my job as best as I possibly could under the parameters that were laid out for me. The only thing I can control is the questions that I ask.
Sure.
And then a week later, he and his camp seemingly backtrack on what he says to me. Someone in his camp goes to the wonderful Diana Rossini at ESPN, and I mean that she's fabulous.
No, she's wonderful.
But basically tells her that he didn't really mean what he said to me. He meant something else. And then he himself, in a press conference setting after the settlement was negotiated, says, kind of goes back a little, or is still a little defiant in the way that, he says he never did anything wrong. And obviously I took a ton of heat. And to me, that's very hard. That's very painful. I've worked very hard to build a store of credibility. And again, Seth, I can't control what the guy says when he talks to me or 5 days after he talks to me. All I can do is ask the question when I'm given the opportunity to ask the question. And would I have loved to follow up? Yes. Would I have loved to have grilled him for a good 45 minutes? Yes. It just wasn't available to me.